Puerto Rico, Prospector, Captain, Mayor, Trader, Settler, Craftsman, or Builder. Which roles will you play in the new world? Will you own the most prosperous plantations? Will you build the most valuable buildings? You have but one goal: achieve the greatest prosperity and highest respect. This is shown by the player who owns the most victory points. All right, so what are y'all looking at here? Everything that you see here is in the base game except for, obviously, the poker chips as well as some of the expansion stuff. So here in the middle, we have the main board. In the main board, normally the bank would go here, but that's going to be off screen because we're actually using poker chips. But we have a number of buildings. On each building, you have the number of victory points that it will be worth at the end of the game. All victory point tallies are going to be at the end of the game. And the cost of the building is in the little white circle over on the left side of the building. And you'll notice that there are 4 columns for a, there will be 1 quarry, 2 quarry, 3 quarry, 4. Right there. Then there are some of the expansion buildings up there at the top, as well as the rolls over here to the right. Then we have the colonist ship. We have the 3 captain ships, if you will, or delivery ships down here. We have the trading house, the governor. The governor is the first player marker, which will rotate around the board as we go along. Then we have a normally limited supply of colonists right here. These, however, because we are playing with the expansion, the quantity of these does not need to be counted as it would normally in the base game. Then we, which is the most tedious part of setup, which we didn't have to do. We have the nobles there. Then we have the various goods that are in the game, and the one that you can barely see off camera, sort of, kind of, over the left side, we have corn, indigo, sugar, coffee, and
tobacco.
I did it right. Tobacco and coffee. I'm sorry. I had it set up for a specific reason. Then we have the various roles, because this is a role selection game. So we have 7 roles available in the 4-player game. We have 1 and 5 count victory points there. Then we have the various plantations available, a stack of quarry tiles. We have replacement plantations there. Then we have everyone's player board. The player board's essentially broken down into 4 kind of quadrants. You have the city where these buildings are going to go. Then we have the plantation, or the island, where, well, you guessed it, the plantations and the quarries will go there. You have a place for your money, or your kind of your personal bank, as well as resources that you may acquire throughout the game. And last but not least, a handy dandy little player aid that explains all the different roles that are available to each player. So that's what you guys are looking at, and the only thing that you don't see on camera is the bank, because we're using poker chips, as I mentioned earlier. So, as mentioned earlier, the goal of the game is victory points. As we acquire some number of victory points as the game goes along, we're just going to collect them and just kind of put them off to a side, face down. Whenever you get enough to turn in for a 5, you can do so, etc., etc. And we're going to, whoever has the most points at the end of the game wins. All right? But how the game actually goes is there's essentially an action phase where the governor, whoever is the first player for that round, is going to choose one of the 7 roles. Then they're going to take the associated action with that role, and then with the exception of the prospector, everyone else will then have an option to be able to also take that role, but without a special benefit. Whoever chooses the actual role gets a special benefit that is shown on each of the tiles. And we'll go over all these in detail here in a little bit. So the governor, whoever it is, let's say for argument's sake, the governor is me. I choose a role. I get whatever the bonus is of that role, and I do what that action allows me to do. Then after I have done so, then Jess will have the option to do as well. Then it will go to Julie, and then it will go to Martin. That will be the end of the round for all intents and purposes. Then, whatever roles are not selected, just like in most regular games with role selection, we're going to take one $1 to place on that to emphasize or to motivate people to try and take that roll in a subsequent round. Then we're going to pass the governor clockwise 1 player, and then we're going to rinse and repeat. And that will go on and on until normally one of a few different things happens in the game. So the game normally, and that's how we're going to talk about this right now, the game normally will end in one of 3 conditions. If you run out of colonists to be able to fill the colonist ship. In this case, that is not the case when you play with the nobles, but we're talking about the base game. The second one is if one player builds all of these spaces. So it says their 12th building, but really what that means is all 12 of these spaces are filled. I say that because some of these buildings will take 2 spaces like so. So when all of these are filled at the end of that action set, that will be the end of the game. Or if we run out of victory point chips, that will trigger the end of the game, okay? So that's how you play. Now let's go over kind of the details of the various actions that are out here in the game. So we'll start off with the settler action. The settler is how we're going to get more plantations onto our island to then be able to produce goods, potentially. So whoever takes that role, and for argument's sake, let's say I go ahead and choose that role as the settler, they may take a quarry instead of a plantation. That is the special ability for choosing the settler. So in this case, because I chose that, I can choose the quarry, or I can choose one of the random plantations that was available. And you just take it, easy enough, and you put it on your board. I'm the only one that can choose the quarry, though, because I'm the only one that chose the settler. So let's say I do choose the quarry. Then Jess goes, say, you know what, she's already into indigo. Maybe she chooses an indigo over there, etc., etc. Julie goes, then Martin goes. Then we're going to wipe these, any that are left, and we're going to put out 5 more, 1 more than player count. Okay? Easy enough? Any questions about the settling action? We'll go into the details of what the circles are and what these things do as we go along with the other roles. Then it's possible, instead of doing that maybe, or maybe with doing that, I choose, or the governor, whoever chooses the builder action. The builder action says you can build buildings, but they cost 1 less doubloon, or $1 less than is shown on the actual tile. So now let's go ahead and talk about those a little bit more in detail. All of these buildings, they're basically rule breakers. All of the violet colored buildings are rule breakers available for the player that has that building, and that building is manned, or woo-manned if you prefer. So if it has a colonist, or in our case, a noble, on that, kind of like what you see here for a quarry, then that building is activated, and whatever that special ability that it conveys is available for that player to take advantage of when is the time to take advantage of that building. Because obviously there are only certain times when things actually are triggered, okay? Like this says during the settler phase, etc., for the hospice, okay? So to build a building, you choose any of the available buildings. If a stack is gone, it is no longer available. You choose whatever one you want, provided that you can afford the cost. So in this case, $3, and I get $1 discount, so that'd be a total of $4. So meaning I could build, and you'll notice that these go in ascending value, first column, second, third, fourth, and also should point out all the noble buildings at the top of the board, which are off the board, but those also are included in this. So I could build any one building, I want to point that out, may build. You are not required to build a building. So maybe I choose, say, one of these up here, which are production buildings. The production buildings, to be able to produce at the plantation, it must have a matching production building. The exception to that would be corn. Corn does not have a production building. So for instance, Julie here, when I choose to build something, Jess chooses or not, Julie would pay the $1 to the bank, and then she built her 1 building. You were allowed a total of 1 building in a single action. Regardless of the amount spent, you can build one building. Then it would go to Martin, so on and so forth. In addition, when building, nope, check that, that's it, no addition. We'll talk about manning these and everything here momentarily, but building buildings, special rule breakers, or production buildings which allow your plantations to produce. Any questions about those? I guess I should also point out that all of these double-sized buildings are some sort of victory point, either generator or victory point endgame scoring thing
Yes.
at the end of the game.
Game
okay,
end, yeah.
all right. So that's the building action. Easy enough. Next, we have the mayor action. The mayor action says this is where you get new colonists and one colonist more for the player that chose the mayor action. So what would happen in this case is whoever's the mayor, if in this case me, I choose one colonist from the supply there to add to my supply. Then I choose one off of the colonist ship. When playing with the nobles, there's no reason not to take the noble, which is basically a victory point colonist. Then everybody else will get one going around and around. So if there were a total of 5 onto the colonist ship, I will have gotten a third one while everyone only got 1. So we go round robin. So then in this case, Jess would get 1, Julie would get 1, and Martin would get 1. Then at that moment, you can then take all of your colonists and freely rearrange them within cities for being able to actually keep your indigo up there, your production plant. So in this case, let's say Julie had 2, she would then freely be able to then man those buildings, as you can see, like so, okay? And if you have more colonists than you have spots, then they'll just hang out and chill out and have a siesta. Otherwise, you choose what to man when. If they are manned, they are active. If they are not manned, they are not active. It's as simple as that. Then, what's going to happen is you'll notice that some of these buildings out here have multiple spaces available. So let's say I had this here. I had, let's say, one there. We'll have one out there and one there. And better example would be if I had one more there. Let's say I chose to man my board after this, when I'm done collecting all my colonists, this is how it ends. Then we go around and announce how many empty worker spaces are there within your city, here within the town. I have 2, let's say Jess had 1, Julie has none, and Martin has none. So I have 2, 3, and that's it. That is how many colonists now come back out onto the ship to refill, to a minimum of 1 per player. With the noble expansion, the first one placed is a noble, then we fill in. If there were, say, 8 available empty spaces between all of us, we would place 8 out there, with the first one being a noble.
Yes.
Any questions about the mayor action?
No.
All right, cool, easy enough, moving on. So now that we have things manned, or woo-manned, it might behoove somebody to choose the craftsman action. Craftsman action, this is how you actually produce. If you choose the craftsman action, you get to produce 1 more good of a type that you already produce. So what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at my tableau here, for instance, to begin with. You'll notice that I have a tobacco plantation, and I have 1 available up here. That means I would produce 1 tobacco. So I would get a tobacco and place it out here. I do also want to point out, everything that you see is piece limited. If it becomes an issue, production happens in turn order, starting with whoever chose the craftsman action to produce. So if there were only, say, 3 tobacco and I took 2 of them, and Jess could produce 2, but I'm the one who took the craftsman, I get 2, Jess would get 1, so sorry for your luck. Okay, all right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right.
Oh, yeah.
I do also want to point out one other thing that may happen. So let's say it were like this. I have 2 tobacco fields being produced, but I only have 1 worker up here in my production building. In that case, how many tobacco do you think I produce? It's a verbal thing.
one.
Correct. So it's only 1. Why? Because I only have 1 in a production building. The same would go if it were like this. I still would only produce 1. I only have 1 field, even though I could produce 2. However, if I had 2 and 2, I would produce 2 tobacco. Easy enough, right? Corn is the only one in the game in which it does not require a production building, meaning if corn's manned, you get a corn. Corn is manned. I get a corn, please.
Well, technically, you would have picked 2 for at least one of those, regardless, because you would have gotten the bonus from being the crowd.
Correct.
Which
So
you covered,
now,
yeah.
so now I produce. If it were, say like this, I produce 1 tobacco. I produce 1 corn. What do I want to produce? An additional 1. I can't produce an indigo because I don't produce indigo.
Right.
So it's either 1 tobacco or 1 corn. We'll go ahead and get a tobacco. There we go. Boom. That's my production. We then would go to Jess, then we would go to Julie, then we would go to Martin. Easy enough. Any questions? Good. Moving on. All right. Next, we have the trader. Trader as in trading goods, not trader as in BSG trader. Not like that. That was a pirate. I don't know why that's a trader. Work with me. Just go with
How
it.
is Star Galactic
That's
a
good.
pirate?
You got that? You're welcome. So the trader, whoever takes the trading action, gets first chance to go ahead and trade a good to the, now I'm all getting stared at funny, at the trading house here. So what does that mean? There are 4 spots, even in a 5-player game. Or a 3-player game. There are 4 spots. You can sell 1 good of 1 type that isn't existing at the trading house. So let's go and let's argue, or let's give an example, that both Jess and I had produced tobacco previously. I could sell corn for $0. However, as the player that sold the good, you get 1 extra doubloon, or 1 extra buck, than what it shows that it actually sells for. So if I sold the corn, I would actually get $1, even though it doesn't sell for anything. But why be nice? Instead, I will go ahead and sell 1 tobacco for 3, plus the extra buck. I would actually get a total of $4 from the bank to add to my supply. Then it goes to the next player. Jess would love to sell her tobacco. However, the trading house is full of tobacco. Why? Because there is a tobacco already on there. So she elects to not sell. So then Julie then says, hey, I'll take a buck. So she places her 1 indigo over there. She is not obligated, but she could choose to do so. Then it would go to Martin, rinse and repeat. Only if the trading house is full at the end of this does it empty. But let's say Jess does not and Martin does not, and that's how it ends up. It does not empty. Meaning, on subsequent turns, when players choose the trader action, they cannot trade in an indigo nor a tobacco. Does that make sense? All right. No questions. Good. Penultimately, yep, we're going with that as a word, captain action. Captain action is actually very similar.
Now you can make the pirate sound.
Arrgh. There we go. We have the goods delivery of the captain. That is where these 3 ships now come into play. So what happens in this case, and let's go back to some examples like so here, and let's go ahead and give Jess a little bit there, and we'll give Martin some coffee. All right. So in this case, if I am the player that chose captain, my captain, I can choose what?
Phil has said, I believe the bonus good.
I'm on it. Let him finish and
Sorry.
I got it. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, moving on. So, talking about the captain. When you choose the captain action, you may sell all of 1 type to a ship, provided that that ship has room on that ship to sell that good. There are 3 ships. There are a total of 5 different resources in this game. Each ship can only hold 1 type of resource. So the first resource on that ship dictates that that ship is now a, say, tobacco ship. So I place this out here, and you can choose either the 5, the 6, or the 7 quantity ship if they're all empty. So let's say, for whatever reason, I choose maybe the 5 ship there. Regardless of the type of resource that is sold to that ship, you get 1 victory point per resource sold. Easy enough? So I sold 2 tobacco, regardless of how much it might actually get you in cash at the trading house. Each good is 1 point, but because I chose the captain, I would get 1 additional victory point, meaning I would get a total of 3 victory points for doing so. I would choose the 3, I would put them face down like so, boom, done. Then it becomes Jess's turn. She is not obligated to sell her tobacco, but if she chooses to, she must sell all of one type. Same with me, but she does choose, and the only ship that she can choose is the ship that already has tobacco already on it. She could not choose one of the other 2 empty ships. Does that make sense? She does not get the bonus, so in that case, Jess would just get the 1 victory point, boom, done. Then we go to Julie, obviously cannot sell indigo to the tobacco ship, but she chooses to do so. She would get 1 victory point. Martin could choose to go ahead and not.
I must.
Correct.
Only
I
one.
don't get the option. If I can ship,
You're right.
I
If
must
you-
ship.
That
Captain
is
the
a
only action
correct.
that is a must.
Thank you. So he would sell that for 2 victory points there. Then it becomes, we continue going around until every player cannot sell.
Right.
I have corn. There are no empty ships available. I cannot sell corn. I am done. We go to Jess, same thing. Julie, Martin. Once that's done, we're done. That's it. If a ship is full, it empties. If a ship is not full, it does not empty. Exactly like the trading house. So they are consistent in that action across the board. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right? All right. The last action, I'm going to talk. Go ahead.
With the captain action, when you are
Yes.
finished, you also, don't you discard the...
Yeah, oh, thank you. Warehouse. So everybody, if, let's say, for whatever reason, there we go. I had that, and I had this left over. Because the ships were full, for whatever reason, this is what I have left over from what I had produced previously, whatnot. At this point, at the end of the captain action, you must discard all your goods, except for 1. Not 1 type, 1 good. Meaning, in this case, I can keep 1 sugar or 1 corn. I choose a sugar, pour some on me, there, boom, done. There we go. And everybody would have to do so. Any questions on that?
No.
All right, the last action is the Prospector Action. This is the only one in which people do not piggyback. Take a buck from the bank. The end.
Yes. And you don't play with that with a 3-player, 2 or 3 round.
Correct. And with a 5-player, you actually have 2 prospectors available in the game. But as a 4-player, there you go. Those are all the available actions on a turn. Now, I'm going to briefly go over some of the buildings out here because I'm not going to hit on everyone. Why? Because we're going to do that when we play, when we buy those buildings. So we'll go ahead and talk about, let's see. Let's talk about the storehouse. The storehouse says if it's manned, remember, must be manned or colonisted.
Populated.
Thank you. Store 3 of any kinds of goods. So instead of me having to discard down to 1, I could keep 3 of them. However, there is a large warehouse out here also that says store 2 kinds of goods. It doesn't matter if I had 6 tobacco. I could store all 6 tobacco. That's 1 type or 1 kind. I could also store, say, 4, say, corn if I had that. Even though that's way more than the 1, it is 1 type, all of 1 type, all of another type. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. Let's see, some others to talk about. The Wharf. This acts as your own ship during the captain phase. Oh, you can't sell something here? Oh, I'll sell to my own wharf. Again, it must be populated.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Let's see. All of these for during production must be manned during production to produce. If you don't want to produce that, you don't have to have them populated. Okay. The construction hut. You can take the quarry instead of the plantation. So what does that mean? If you're not the one that took the settler action, and if that is populated, you still can take the quarry, even though you're not allowed to normally. That's the rule breaker for that. Again, must be populated. And the quarries are limited on how many there are. And speaking of the quarries, let's double back a little bit on the buildings. During the builder action, I told you, whoever takes the builder, it costs 1 less doubloon whenever you choose a building. you'll notice that there are quarries at the top of the board as well. If you have manned quarries, populated quarries, you can get one further discount, or just a discount if you were not the builder, to a discount down to 0. A building will never pay you for building it, but it could get down to 0. However, the row or the column in which the building is represented shows how many populated quarries of a discount you can actually count. So even if I have 3 populated quarries when I choose to build a building, I only can get a 1 discount because it shows 1 in that column. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. That pretty much is the game, except for the triggers for the end of the game. The base game that does not have the nobles either run out of colonists to be able to colonize the ship, run out of victory points, or if somebody builds all 12 of these, you finish that specific action that triggered that thing, and that's the end of the game. At that point, you're going to count up victory points, which are the victory points in the top right of all of these buildings, populated or not, and populated victory point buildings as well.
Except for the statue.
Correct, which obviously there's no spot for, so it's just a straight 18 point.
8.
It's 8.
Yes.
Where did I get 18? I have no idea.
Because there's a 10 and an 8.
Yeah,
We'll go with that.
8 points on that. Then count up the victory points you have acquired already, plus your buildings.
Yeah.
And any special ability for any of the endgame points. Whoever has the most points wins. Tiebreaker, we'll go into it if need be. Okay? Okay. Now let's talk about the expansions. This is pretty cool. The first expansion is the new buildings. We have a selection of the new buildings we drafted before the game comes out. And
Yes.
you want to just grab a handful of those and just to show. There are a bunch of new buildings available, as well as the standard buildings that are available in the game. What we did is we went ahead and drafted to choose what goes out on the board, as you can see populated here, and we did so. There are some that also encompass the forests. It was not drafted, so it's not going to be in the game. Easy enough. That's pretty much the overhead for the rules for the first expansion, which is the new buildings. Okay? The Nobles expansion, however, is for all the buildings that Julie was sort of just pointing at the top of the board up here. So all of those buildings are part of the Nobles expansion, as are the Nobles themselves. So let's talk about what this expansion does. So there are 7 new buildings available, along with a jeweler building there and one endgame royal garden available. In addition to that, all of those are purchasable during the builder or buildable during the builder step or phase
Yes.
selection. Instead of choosing one of these, if you choose, you may choose to build one of the noble buildings. Some of them convey, hey, get an extra noble from the supply, etc., etc. Again, these are piece limited. The other 2 rules regarding the nobles: whenever we repopulate the colonist ship, the first one that goes on there is a noble. So if there's going to be 4 or 8 of them on there, as I mentioned earlier, one of the nobles will go on. The second thing is, at the end of the game, a noble is worth 1 victory point. There you go. Since we're talking about the expansion specifically, I'll go ahead and read over all of the nobles buildings here. So the first one, we have the land office. Julie, could you reach and just point? I will read.
Absolutely.
But there we go. So +1 plantation. Hold on. I want to actually get this right for the land office. Here we go. In the trader phase, the owner of the colonist-occupied land office can buy the topmost plantation tile from one of the face-down stacks for $1 or 1 doubloon. Okay? The player places that onto their island, and then in the trader phase, the owner of a noble-occupied land office can discard a plantation tile from their island. Maybe they have too many or they don't need it anymore, for $1 from the bank. Maybe you need an extra $1. Pretty nice little flexibility building there. Next, we have the chapel. In the craftsman phase, the owner of the colonist occupied chapel takes a buck from the bank, and the owner, if it's noble occupied, takes a victory point every time the craftsman phase goes. Get an extra buck or a victory point. That can be nice. Like I said, I've only played this game once without all of these expansions.
see why.
So there we go. All right, next is the hunting lodge. At the end of the settler phase, the owner of a colonist-occupied hunting lodge can discard a plantation tile from their island, and the owners of a noble-occupied hunting lodge can take 2 victory points if they have the most empty land spaces.
Ooh. Okay.
So there is that caveat. Okay? If tied, you know what you're not? Have the
most,
most.
yeah.
Ergo, you don't get
No,
the 2
get it.
victory
No.
points. Okay. All right. Next, we have the zoning office. The owner of a colonist-occupied zoning office pays 1 less doubloon when building a small building, meaning this, or this. Okay. And the owner of a noble-occupied zoning office pays 2 less when building these. Okay. All right. Next, we have the royal supplier. On the first turn to ship goods, so the first time you have an opportunity in which you must ship goods during the captain phase, before they ship anything, the owners of an occupied royal supplier, colonist or noble, does not matter, they can supply the royal warehouse, i.e. the supply, so put it back into the supply, with a number of goods from their windrows equal to the number of nobles on their island, and take a point each. So if you have a lot of nobles down here working here, it's basically a free sell, regardless. Okay? They must be of different kinds, however, and they cannot be duplicates. All right? All right. Next, we have the villa. I know it's villa, but on a player's first turn in the mayor phase, again, the mayor phase is selecting new colonists from the ship here. The owner of an occupied villa, again, doesn't matter, colonist or noble, can take a noble from the supply instead of a colonist, but not the ship. You leave it on the you just take it from the supply. If there are no more nobles, they take a colonist from the supply instead if there's one left. Okay, moving on, the jeweler. In the craftsman phase, the owner of an occupied jeweler, again, doesn't matter, colonist or noble, takes a doubloon from the bank for each noble on their island. All right? Easy enough? All right. Oh, and one other thing about the jeweler. Notice that it's colored different.
Yes.
It's counted as a large production building when we talk about the guild hall, which, did we bring the guild hall in? Yes. All right, right here. So regarding this, for endgame scoring, it's going to be considered a large building in that case, okay? And then last but not least, we have the royal garden, which is at the end of the game, the owner of the occupied royal garden scores 1 for every noble on their island. So in other words, they already are worth 1 point, so now they're worth 2 per noble. And there you go. That's the expansion. That, like, the hard part of the explaining of that was just literally going over the details of the various buildings. That's the overhead. Any questions? Good, let's get started.
Phil Little
Okay.
had brought up correctly when you went over the craftsman that it's
Okay.
actually as your last duty that the craftsman takes 1 additional good. So it goes around and then if
Correct.
supply allows.
Thank you for the correction, and that is a minor but significant point. So thank you for pointing that out.
Because of
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically the noble buildings at the top mostly are different if they're occupied by a colonist or a noble. There are a couple of exceptions, as I covered. And if, as we go along, we have any questions, the rule book's pretty good
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
All right, easy enough. So any questions?